Melissa still remembers that meeting vividly. She walked into the HR office thinking that finally someone was willing to listen. She talked about the pressure she was under, the ongoing exhaustion, the challenges she was having with her manager. The conversation felt professional and supportive. HR nodded, took notes, asked questions. Everything seemed like a discussion focused on finding a solution. So Melissa left the room feeling relieved. But a few months later, when she looked back at everything that happened afterwards, she realized something she could never forget. That conversation hadn't unfolded the way she thought it had. And that was when Melissa began to understand a truth that very few people are ever taught before they walk into an HR office. Melissa used to think HR was listening to her story. But after years in the corporate world, she realized they are often listening for something else: risk. While Melissa was trying to explain how she felt, the person across the table might have been evaluating what those words meant for the company, the team, and her future within the organization. That's when Melissa realized something important. In the workplace, words don't just communicate thoughts, they shape perceptions. And perceptions often become reputations. The interesting part is that none of the things Melissa said sounded dangerous. Quite the opposite. Most of them were things employees say every day. Things that seem completely normal, until she realized other people might be hearing them very differently. And the first one was a phrase she used more than almost any other. Number 10, I just need to vent. This was something Melissa used to say without giving it much thought. In fact, at the time, she believed it made conversations easier. It was her way of saying, don't worry, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. But eventually she realized something. When you downplay what you're about to say, other people often do the same. The moment Melissa said she just needed to vent, the conversation shifted from a workplace issue to an emotional reaction. People might remember that she was frustrated, but not necessarily remember the problem that needed to be addressed. That's when she changed her approach. Instead of saying, I just need to vent for a minute, Melissa started saying, I'd like to discuss an issue that's affecting my work and hopefully find a constructive solution. It sounds simple, but the way a conversation begins often determines how it ends. And there was another phrase that was even more common, one that many people believe makes them sound more reasonable. Number 9, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Melissa used to add this line to the end of countless conversations. She didn't want to come across as someone who complained. She didn't want to seem overly emotional. So she often softened her own concerns before anyone else could. But eventually she noticed a strange contradiction. The harder she tried to prove she was being reasonable, the more she weakened her own position. Because the moment you start questioning your own concerns, you give other people permission to question them too. So Melissa stopped judging her own feelings. Instead of saying, maybe I'm just being too sensitive, she started saying, I'd like to share a few specific situations that have occurred and explain how they've affected my work. Dates, events, behaviors, impact. Those things usually carry far more weight than apologizing for your own perspective. But even after she learned to focus on facts, Melissa discovered another mistake that causes many workplace conversations to go off track. Number 8, this isn't fair. Melissa understood that feeling because sometimes what happens at work genuinely does feel unfair. The person doing more work doesn't get recognized. Someone else gets the opportunity you wanted, or a decision is made that simply doesn't seem to make sense. But eventually, Melissa realized something. The more she talked about fairness, the further the conversation moved away from what had actually happened. And that's when discussions can quickly turn into debates about perceptions rather than facts. Later on, instead of saying, this isn't fair, Melissa started asking, I'd like to better understand the criteria or process that was used to make this decision. Just a small shift, but it forces the conversation back to the facts. And facts usually lead to clearer answers than emotions. Still, emotions don't always show up as frustration. Sometimes they show up as a name. Number 7, I hate my manager. There was a time when Melissa believed all of her workplace problems could be traced back to one person, her manager. The more frustrated she became, the more she wanted to talk about that person. But eventually she realized something. The moment a conversation shifts from behavior to character, the issue starts becoming personal. People stop focusing on what happened. They start focusing on who's right and who's wrong. That's when Melissa changed her approach. Instead of saying, "I hate my manager," she started saying, "I'm experiencing some challenges in working with my manager, and I'd like to discuss possible ways to improve the situation." The new wording didn't make the problem any smaller. It simply made the problem easier to solve. Melissa used to think the biggest challenge at work was dealing with difficult people. But over time, she discovered something even more complicated. Sometimes people don't just lose trust in one person. They begin losing trust in the entire organization. And that's when conversations can become far more risky. Number 6, I don't trust leadership. Melissa once believed that being completely honest was always the best approach. But over time, she realized there's a huge difference between questioning a decision and attacking the people behind it. When you say you don't trust leadership, most people don't hear disappointment. They hear opposition. That's when Melissa started changing the way she communicated. Instead of saying, "I don't trust leadership," she began saying, "I'd like to better understand the reasoning and direction behind this decision." That question helped her gather information instead of creating more distance. And the more Melissa learned about how organizations operate, the more she realized something. Many people don't get into trouble because of what they think. They get into trouble because of how they describe their situation. Number 5, I'm stressed out. This was one of the statements that made Melissa think the most, because what she was trying to communicate was that she felt overwhelmed. But what others might hear was that she couldn't handle the workload. That realization taught Melissa something important. The same situation can create very different perceptions depending on how it's described. Later, instead of saying, "I'm really stressed out," Melissa started saying, "My current workload is affecting my ability to prioritize effectively and maintain the level of performance I expect from myself. I'd like to discuss the best way to address it." She wasn't denying the pressure. She was simply describing it more specifically. And that's when Melissa realized something. In the workplace, people may sympathize with your feelings, but important decisions are usually made based on information, and nowhere is that more obvious than in conversations about compensation. Number 4, I'm not being paid what I'm worth. Melissa used to walk into salary discussions carrying a lot of frustration. She believed that if people understood how disappointed she felt, they would change their decision. But eventually, she realized something. Feelings don't create budgets. Data does. Market compensation, performance results, scope of responsibility, business impact. That's when Melissa changed her approach. Instead of saying, "I'm not being paid what I'm worth," she started saying, "I'd like to discuss my compensation based on my performance, current responsibilities, and market benchmarks." The conversation immediately became more professional. But Melissa eventually learned something even more important than salary negotiations. Not every piece of information should be shared. Number 3, I'm looking for a new job. There was a time when Melissa believed that letting the company know she was job hunting would make them realize her value. But reality turned out differently. She noticed herself appearing less often in long-term plans, being considered less frequently for new opportunities, and gradually becoming less visible in conversations about the future. That's when Melissa understood a simple truth. Organizations tend to invest the most in people they believe will stay. After that, she stopped using the possibility of leaving as a signal or a negotiating tactic. She kept her job search completely private, because she realized that some information doesn't make you stronger when you share it, and this was one of those things. But then Melissa discovered something even more thought-provoking. Many people don't just share too much. They forget that what they say can last far longer than they expect. Number 2, please don't document this. Melissa used to believe that some conversations stayed inside the room where they happened. But over time, she realized that many important decisions were shaped by notes she never even saw. That realization completely changed the way she communicated. Instead of saying, "Please don't document this," Melissa started reminding herself of a different rule. Only say things that you would still feel comfortable with if they appeared in a file someday, not because of fear, but because clarity protects you far better than ambiguity ever will. And eventually, Melissa realized that the most dangerous phrase wasn't a complaint at all. It was a threat. Number 1, I'm going to sue. There was a time when Melissa believed power came from letting people know she was ready to fight. But after years in the workplace, she discovered something different. Real power often comes from preparation. The people who create the greatest impact are rarely the loudest. They're usually the most prepared. Documentation, emails, timelines, events, evidence, data. Over time, Melissa stopped giving warnings. Instead, she focused on understanding the situation, preserving information, and seeking appropriate advice before taking action. Because she realized that in the most important conflicts of a career, evidence usually carries more weight than emotion. After all of those meetings, Melissa came to a fascinating realization. Most people walk into an HR office hoping to be understood, but the people who protect themselves most effectively walk in with a different goal. They want to be understood accurately. And those are two very different things. When she was younger, Melissa spent a lot of energy trying to make people feel what she felt. But over time, she realized that emotions are difficult to communicate perfectly. Facts are not. And the more experience she gained, the more she understood that clarity often protects you better than sympathy. Melissa once thought the most important skill at work was doing great work. And of course, that matters. But after years in the corporate world, she discovered another truth. You're not judged only by what you do. You're also judged by how what you do is perceived, documented, and understood by others. That's why the most effective professionals don't just learn how to do their jobs well, they learn how to communicate, document, and protect themselves. Because sometimes the difference between two nearly identical careers isn't talent. It's the story the organization believes to be true. If today's video made you see the workplace a little differently, share your experience in the comments below. Have you ever said any of the phrases on this list? And if one lesson stood out more than the others, we'd love to hear which one it was. If you'd like to explore the hidden rules of the workplace psychology, and practical strategies for protecting your career in an increasingly complex world, subscribe to You and Me at Work. We're building a community for people who want to navigate corporate life without losing themselves along the way. Thank you for spending your time with us, and I'll see you in the next video.